Okay, so to begin with, space of urgency. I think I first should introduce myself. So my name is Liese Kingma. Next to being one of the project developers of the Space of Urgency project, I am also main curator and project lead of the RÄUME conference. So if you hear a little bit of a hazy voice and I make some mistakes while saying words, it's because I'm extremely tired, but also very enthusiastic. So let's get started. So space of urgency. We have a large community here, by the way, that is also in the building, multiple spaces from countries. I will go in a bit. So we are a growing network of independent cultural communities, collectives and activists that subscribe to the idea that physical space is the essential to the survival of our communities. We have been all living online, lately, but what are we without our spaces and free spaces in order to interact, multiply and together exchange? We will be hearing a little bit also about that from our several speakers. Next to that, then questioning space of urgency. Everything is urgent. We're living in a world of urgency. So what is a space of urgency? Well, we heard the word a lot today, also by spaces of adaptation, of course. It's a self-organized physical space, a free space to organize community projects and collective action, where social values trump commercial profits, and resisting dominant law and social norm injustices. So striving for social political change beyond the boundaries of the space. And that's exactly also the reason why they are threatened. So basically, there we go. They are created by and for underrepresented communities. So this is our narrative that we share with a lot of spaces, activists and artists. And they're a reaction to exclusion and oppression in their societies. And that's also the reason why this constant political pressure is there, because the spaces are really actively fighting against social norms such as patriarchy and racism. And, you know, we all do. Those spaces are lacking governmental support, financial support, because they also directly represent that non-capitalistic systems. So this platform we're setting up, and everybody sees downstairs in the hallway on the different briefs and flyers. So basically, we need to first understand how our community spaces come to be, also in order to basically advocate for those spaces and to build or strengthen that core resistance of those spaces. So understanding them, we thought with a lot of persons that are fighting for these spaces of urgency is very important. That's why we also created this diagram for you to take a look at, to understand how a space of urgency comes to existence by the oppression of a community, to creating a free space, growing social impact, increasing the pressure from conservative social norms. And that is completely right, we think, that these kind of spaces altogether as a movement deserve a platform to basically be strengthened from the inside and giving a countervoice to opposition, developing systematic solutions. So what are we trying to aim with? Since we started this larger kind of platform, or you can call it an alliance, we believe that strengthening the resilience of the spaces through knowledge exchange and resources is very important. Giving that counterforce to oppression by raising public awareness and developing structural solutions by negotiating with dominant systems in order to create larger impacts. So yeah, what are those impacts? Because we are busy now already for I think 2 years and about. What we have mostly been doing the past year is giving a countervoice and raising public awareness. What we are doing now, streaming content and amplifying voices, also in collaboration with United We Stream. Activism and demonstrations, where I go deeper in a little bit. This year we did this in Berlin. Social media activism, if you look at the Instagram page, and strengthening the resilience through knowledge exchange is really something we are doing with this conference as an example, as a networking event and local media collaborations to again amplify those spaces, voices of people that are in urgency. What we want to do the next years, by first raising that public awareness, is look way more deeper into developing structural solutions by negotiating even with those dominant systems. And that can be a very critical point, but unfortunately me myself as well, starting as a squatter, being a raver, doing self-organized events and being pushed back further and further with our communities, I see that sometimes talking and growing trust between those systems is very important to protect our spaces. So let's go to the next. This was an example of a demonstration with this year, the 12th of June. I hope I'm not too tired to have the date wrong. But basically, we there also gave a countervoice and we raised public awareness through activism and demonstrations, where we said, great, but if we in Berlin are free or we can have a victory, fantastic. But if we're not everywhere free, in Palestine, Colombia, other spaces where there's a large oppression, then how can we call ourselves a good and free community at all? So we always really emphasize the solidarity with other cities and other spaces in urgency to strengthen this public awareness. So basically I look back. I hope that is doable here. As I wanted to show you a video of the demonstration very briefly. This is Nicolas Jaar.
Chile, Brazil, the US, Australia, and so many other places around the world are fighting for. Let's fight for the echo of these struggles to resound the world over, and let's end all complicity in systems of global oppression and racist subjugation. And let's always push to elevate the voices of urgency that resound in the spaces that we're trying to protect here today.
Great. Thank you. Now I need to go back here. And it needs to go full screen. Ricardo. Is he here? I don't think so. 1 second. Technical difficulty. So yeah, I can also do it like this with the background, or maybe Ricardo is here to help me very quickly. So giving a countervoice and raising public awareness. So streaming content, I'm just telling a lot what we are doing, but what I'm really trying to say is that we are just a bunch of people that think that is super important and that is a growing movement. We can't do those things without everybody being here on the conference and being a part of this. So what is the intention of us is that we're slowly growing out and that people can maybe recognize themselves in this call, in these kind of platforms, and join the struggle with us to amplify it even more. And that is a very important message. The next one. So this is just an example of what we're doing when, for instance, the space is under attack, such as the Köpi, which I think is a very good example next to other Wagenplatz in Berlin as a space of urgency. And next to that, we are profiling on the website the hubs. You can take a look at that downstairs, something not going well. And also downstairs in the hall, you can find Siren, a magazine, also really with art and visual images communicating the urgency of spaces, gentrification, and the issues a lot of activists and artists have to deal with. So you can go take a look downstairs. So yeah, why are we here today? And why am I all saying this and telling you what we do? Because we really want, also through this conference, to go deeper into strengthening the resilience from the community out. And that is why we say we have to do an Envisioning Free Space conference. This is the reason why it needs to be physical, in our opinion, because we need to be together and able to interact. And we don't know what's coming in the future, so we need to together talk about next possible futures. So yeah, where we go then? I think there also is Lucas Counter standing there today talking about tools and also the municipality of Amsterdam. How can we create free space policies and also instruments in urban planning that really leave a long time impact. So you see a little bit the scope. On one hand, we're raising public awareness. On the other hand, we're working also directly with transdisciplinary actors on local tools and impacts. One of them is the Model Space project. I'm skipping a little bit the time so we can go faster, which we also publish different kind of reports towards CNAIDS of culture, which actually raise the voices of the self-organized communities, which now led also Berlin to the opening of various model spaces, non-commercial spaces for experimental culture. So yeah, what we're going to do after this talk, and very important, we're going to also take a look at how can we grow these transnational alliances. Also, very important, we are there in Berlin, what we already said, but how can we create these alliances with actors that are today in the conference? An example is the ECF, European Cultural Foundation, why we are just all together getting funded to build bridges between Berlin, Tbilisi, Sarajevo, together with the Tresor Foundation, really building, strengthening, creating blueprints for the protection of spaces in Europe. And next to that, the Spaces of Adaptation project, which you all saw this morning. So I'm going to actually invite a few guests now to the stage, because some of them are already familiar about our project and are already in that circle and network of activists. But the conference wouldn't be the conference if we hear these voices of urgency today about spaces, self-organized collectives, people that are actually in this moment in danger zones, are cut back, are repressed, and how can we take back those temporary autonomous zones, which we can also call spaces of urgency. And then we also going to look, how do we get permanent ones? Because we want to keep them forever, don't we? So how do we do that? So I will share a few visions and stories. And the first person that is coming up the stage to do that is Marc Angelo. So thank you. Thanks. And I would really, really like to mention, this is an interactive conference. If you have any questions afterwards, raise your hand. I would really like to see a dialogue, so we really have an even exchange. There you go. Yeah, we just try. Is it good? Is it working?
Hello, hello. Right, I'll introduce myself then. As Liese said, thanks for the intro. I'm Marc. Back in the day, so that was at least 30 years ago now, I think, I was one of the founding members of the Spiral Tribe sound system. Who were Spiral Tribe, for those that don't know? We were a very loose collective of friends initially who just came together and were living in London. Because of the gentrification and the very tight squeeze on just living or just being human, having any kind of social space or creative space, we had to squat, of course, and there was a huge amount of empty buildings around. The gentrification, the privatization was in full swing. But you wouldn't actually know that at the time, because there were huge tracts of empty buildings, commercial buildings, and residences. What we didn't realize at the time, and I'll mention this because it's very relevant, was there was a very corrupt local government in power, and they were gerrymandering as well as also clearing out poor families who they felt were less likely to vote for the right wing. So you had a very, very hard situation where all the public housing was being cleared, boarded up, property banked, done up, and then sold at huge profits, which was actually going into the right wing's pockets at the time. Many years later, they were actually found guilty, and they had huge fines. And the woman responsible, Shirley Porter, she, I think it was £37 million fine she was given by the criminal court for her corruption. Now, I'm going to mention these people because I think it's very relevant to the story and to the history of free space. These people go against the common good, the common law, and they are individuals, or they are small groups of individuals, and they are very much serving their own ends, their own purpose. It's not, as Margaret Thatcher would have us believe, that this is the only reality there actually is. There was another guy back in 1990 where we were first squatting and we first started the Free Party sound system. His name was Graham Bright. He was a member of Parliament, and he introduced a bill that criminalised organising free raves. Not free, sorry, pay-in raves, because at that moment in time there was only really big pay-in events, which were, you know, a little bit gangster, and a lot of money was being made, but they were still amazing, they were still great. And of course, because they were right-wing, the right-wing government, they had no concept of what a free party might be, or that anyone would be idiotic enough to do something for nothing. So he brought in new laws, which criminalised anything to do with organising parties. But it then turns out, of course, that he was actually representing the interests of the breweries, because there was a 30% drop in young people drinking and attending nightclubs, etc. The leisure industry was actually at risk from these illegal, unlicensed parties. So again, I just want to mention these sort of historic figures in my story, because I think it's very relevant to the here and the now and to the future that we identify these groups and their agendas. And we don't just have this kind of blanket reality that we think that somehow this is how it is and that we're up against something that we can't actually fight. You know, these people have names and addresses. So anyway, back to who Spiral Tribe actually were and why we were sort of came into existence. So, you know, obviously, when you're sort of artistic or you love music, dancing, or like me, I was a graphic artist, you inevitably come across that beautiful venue that's got a big space. I mean, you know, the first thing I thought when I saw this space is like, hey, you know, this is interesting. Is you want to party it, and we didn't have a sound system at that point, but it's part of human nature, I feel. You know, to want to come together. To want to dance, to listen to music, to have that, it's very core, I believe. I grew up in a world in the 1960s and 70s where that wasn't really seen as true. There were free festivals, which I used to hitchhike to as a teenager, so that's kind of my background. But it was very much very authoritarian, and anyone outside of the norm of that was a nutter, was somehow, you know, lost focus on reality. And this again is a very important thing, going back to the corrupt privatization of community space, of cities, of urban space, because we began to realize as our community got stronger, obviously it did, non-stop, every single weekend, have the sound system on in empty buildings, making it available to the public, and all the things that generates around it, the networking, and also, of course, the inspiration to do other things, to make music and what have you. All these things were very much kind of opposed to that authoritarianism, that very narrow idea of what reality was, and the construct of the sort of capitalism, shall we call it, the economy that was all very much just for the few, became very, very clear. We could actually see where the walls were. The walls which had been kind of glass and invisible suddenly became clear. So as we did bigger and bigger parties, because they started off very small, and of course you're very tempted when you see a big warehouse where you have to take the warehouse, and of course more people come, so weekend to weekend it got crazy in a very, very short space of time, within a few months. And so not only did we find that there was a huge need for these parties, these free parties, there was this vacuum in in society, something was not being taken care of, and we were doing it, and it just seemed like a very natural thing to do. So, okay, we were exploring space, we were finding the vacuums, we were filling the gaps, we were just being humans and do what humans do. We were kind of counter the culture that was being imposed, which was, you know, this ridiculous economics of just extractive capitalism. But then another thing was happening, and it might have had something to do with the techno. There was another thing going on, and that was we were also testing the edges of society. And we were finding the edges, and we were getting very curious about what was beyond. Because again, I think something has changed in this generation. A lot of people have grown up with that experience. But when we were doing it back in the 90s, we weren't the first, but we were among the first people doing the Free Party sound system. And for us, it was new territory. You know, we did not, you know, it was magic for us. Even though we were the organizers, we were the people that were taking the buildings, we were doing the sound system, the music, the this, that, and the other. It was a magical space of possibility that we were entering into and we were sharing across the weekend. And it was actually difficult to remember exactly where that space was. You sort of emerged up, and then during the week it was back to the 9 to 5 or whatever people doing, the normality. And your reference points were, you know, they weren't solid because this was very new territory. And it was synaptic territory. So as a graphic artist, that's where I got very heavily involved and really intrigued. I was designing the banners, the flags, the new symbols, the new iconography, beyond language. So everything was very symbolic. But the idea was, I suppose, very much like a computer icon shortcut. You know, you don't have to go and find the file and blah, blah, and blee. You just go dink, and you're there again. You remember it. And so all the look of a Spiral Tribe event very much had this very powerful graphic. And that, for me, was something else very interesting, because what it was doing, that was opening up this kind of synaptic space. It really was something that you could then access really quite easily. So, you know, it wasn't just that great tune that you heard at the weekend, if you heard it again, or if it ever got out of your head, that would sort of access you back into this sort of reality that was far stronger than the imposed construct of the neoliberal, of Margaret Thatcher's neoliberalism. You know, it's far more solid. And the interesting thing was, of course, is that all the big institutions at that point in the 90s, because people didn't really have mobile phones or no personal computers, or the internet, you know, was in its infancy, was the monolithic institutions were so slow on the uptake. For example, the BBC in Britain had super control over, you know, all the sort of popular music. And you know, it wasn't until, I guess, sort of like 10 years later that they actually caught on to the fact that there was such a thing as techno. The authorities, of course, in Britain, another great big monstrous institution, very sluggish, really didn't get what was going on at all. But what they did see is they saw all these young people massing together for mysterious reasons that, you know, they really couldn't understand it. I mean, some did. I mean, you know, I have to say, some of the cops that came down, they would say that, you know, it's one of the best assignments they'd ever had, and they'd never seen people have so much fun. You know, they couldn't understand what their boss's problem was with the situation. But because it just escalated all out of control, and when I say out of control, in a very good way, it really we were creatures of creative chaos. You know, it was a very fruitful and a fantastic sort of trajectory that everybody was on. But the famous date was in May 1992, where we went along to Castle Morton Common, which was a dispossessed free festival from back in the 70s. And it got pushed and pushed. There was a 37-mile long convoy. I don't know what that is in kilometers, but it was enormous, of trucks and buses, and it was just being pushed from police region to police region, and all the police chiefs were not allowing all these. I don't know what they thought of us exactly, but that they didn't want us, or certainly not a 37-mile convoy of these types in their territory. And there was a police chief in Castle Morton, and he decided for humanitarian reasons that he was going to allow them onto Castle Morton Common. And I think that went on for about 4 days or something. And at the end of it all, because Spiral Tribe had been quite high profile, very anti-authoritarian, we'd really kind of stuck the finger up to the right-wing government and been quite vocal about it. And so we got arrested, we got jumped on, and it turned out there'd been a huge undercover operation, all our phone calls had been monitored, etc., for weeks and weeks for advance. And they then decided that this was the biggest ever illegal free party ever organised, and that we were going to be made an example of. So it was a bit of a shock, because all we'd done is turn up and plug in and play like all the other sound systems at Castle Morton Common. So we got quite a lot of notoriety from that. And of course, the music industry was suddenly very interested in what they saw as the new Sex Pistols. I mean, we didn't really know what was going on at all and what we were doing. We were just going weekend to weekend and letting it roll. And so Youth from Killing Joke approached us and offered us a small record deal to go on his label. And it was, we thought, we didn't trust the corporate world at all. But we thought if we can go into this with our eyes open, then maybe we could make this thing work. And we had trust in Youth. And so we got this little record deal. And as soon as we got the money, we bought in those days it was state-of-the-art, it would be pretty basic these days, and put it into a circus trailer, a showman's trailer. Meanwhile, we were 2 years, I think, waiting for our court case to come. We came to Berlin while we were waiting for that to all happen. We came here with the sound system and the studio, and we were actually on Potsdamer Platz. Potsdamer Platz then was a slightly different place. It was leveled, it was just rubble, it was hard rubble. And we were actually in the position in between the two walls, the killing zone. We were in the killing zone. So we were in no man's land, but at the heart of everything. And we would just invite anybody into the studio, anybody. We'd make a record with them. Because back in those days with vinyl, I think it cost us 80 cents to make an EP with 4 tracks. And so what we could do is we could make a record, we could swap it with other people making their own underground records. Everybody would then have their equal cut, and everyone would have the world's best underground distribution network and little record shop. So very quickly we could fund free parties, we could fund getting equipment, other people could fund the same and buy studio equipment. So the whole thing just went poof. So it was an incredible moment. I mean, we had no idea that MP3s were just around the corner. There we were celebrating technologies, opening up all these beautiful new opportunities, this new free space, where actually the crunch was still to come. But that was back in the days of vinyl, So one of the EPs that we did was called Forward the Revolution. And it became quite an anthem, and I think still, in a way, it still is. It was written by Sim Simmer and MC Scallywag and 69dB, all still members of Spiral Tribe. And it had, it was very environmentally based, it was very sensitive and aware for its time. I think it actually got to number 66 in the charts, do you know what I mean? I mean, I don't know what that means, but, it had some kind of impact into the mainstream world. But it was through this expression of our position with the music, with that channel of creativity. The channel of creativity was, and the autonomous channel of creativity was really important. You know, again, just to sort of put that in context, what was very, very important then was free parties, illegal, unlicensed, pirate radio stations, and white labels. You know, this was where the information was coming through pure and unadulterated. This is where one could really connect with what it was to be purely human without any kind of influence outside of that, and one would be inspired to contribute one's own creativity to it in whatever way. So, you know, I think the pirate thing is very, very important in this. You know, if it's on a mainstream channel, then it does tend to get corrupted very quickly. So, it all came on top with the police and the government. It turned out to be, I think, the UK's biggest and most expensive trial ever. £4 million it cost. We were in court for nearly, I think it was 2.5 months. We were in court every day and locked up in the cells below in between. And this kind of brings me on to the second half of what I want to say, because this first bit, the sort of history and everything, I know Debbie, who couldn't be here today, was going to talk about in more depth. But this whole thing of the police and the intensity in which they want to deal with any autonomous free space, free party, squatting. I mean, look what's been happening in Berlin over the last couple of years. You know, 2,000 riot police and 2 armoured vehicles, you know, to evict the Kopi-Wagenplatz. I mean, you know, I mean, absolutely crazy. I mean, but clearly it's just like with the war on drugs, you know, the security forces and the people that support them and with all the security kit, this is big business, you know, this is big business for them. And what's happening in France? You know, there's been so many brutal attacks. I know the French police generally are very brutal. The CRS are known for it. But there's been this surge in people having their arms and legs blown off, their eyes blinded, broken bones, because there's French companies with government contracts with these explosive grenades. You know, they just got rid of the last one, which was 25 grams of TNT, it's supposed to be non-lethal, and they've exchanged it for one with 14 grams, which blew off the arm here of a young boy around the solstice at a free party. And so, just to sort of pull this all together, with the neoliberal capitalist system being so defunct and corrupt and just looking after a very few people, with the extractive economy just destroying the planet, just not really sorting anything out, just hoarding money in the Cayman Islands or in, you know, some tax haven, and then more and more money being put into the militarization and crowd control of the people by the police. There is something going on, and that is something we have to be very, very aware of and tread very carefully about, because, as I mentioned earlier, okay, those big, monstrous bureaucracies, they were very slow on the uptake, but they've all caught up now. They've all caught up, they're all digitalized, and big business is in on the act as well. Big business is really taking advantages of the vacuums, just as we took advantage of those open spaces and the opportunities, because that's what humans do, you know, we're opportunistic. And when we see a new space, a new territory, we like to go and explore it. But what seems to me to be the case, and what the big change, the big difference between 30 years ago and the interceding years is, and now, is that they have all caught up and they're all being super predatory on what new territories they can privatize. So it's not just the gentrification that we're all very familiar with. It's the patenting of molecules now. You know, it's the what do they call it? The ideas, you know, they're patenting ideas. The extension of copyright, you know, Disney and Sony have managed to get copyright just sort of like almost to infinity. So what they're doing is they're just closing down all these areas. And as soon as some idea pops up, there they are. And they've got the full backing of the police, the military, and all that goes with it. But my question really, I suppose, taking this all into account, is, yeah, okay, they're being opportunistic, totally in a very destructive and ridiculous and actually very stupid, very foolish way. But it seems to me that rather than being reactionary to that, possibly if we can pull on our greatest asset, which is our human imagination, which is then fired and actioned by creativity, our ability to think things through and then to bring them into reality through that process of creativity, we could actually upgrade and we could redefine what we mean by revolution. Because this whole idea of forward the revolution, it's great, it's nice, it's, you know, I get it, I was there, I'm all for it. But maybe what needs to happen now is we really need to redefine that, reimagine and redesign what would actually be more effective. And I just want to end, if I may, to let you know that we managed to get our publishing back from Forward the Revolution just recently. And I think it's 30 years this November, so this is now the anniversary of Forward the Revolution, that it was released. We are going to re-release it. And we are re-releasing it with an emergency hotline of a French Lawyers Association, FSFJ, who will intervene if the cops arrive. They will give legal support to people. And all our royalties we are going to give to such groups like that, so that we're putting what came out of the Free Party movement, we're putting back in. And I just want to do that as a kind of a little nod, and I hope it will be helpful. But then it also excites me again, because, you know, back in those days when we had the ability to generate our own vinyl, which was just from our own minds and from our own fingertips, our own creativity, we could fund so much. And that was a new territory, and that was something new for all of us, and the whole techno thing was completely new. These things can, you know, we just got to imagine them and then bring them into being. And so I do feel that through cooperation, cooperatives, that's something I've worked on a lot in the last 30 years and still doing. Things like ownership, shared common ownership, are the way forward for me personally. And I think Lisa's very right here. You know, it's about the networking and the sharing of resources, the sharing of knowledge and skills. And in that way, I think, yeah, Forward the Revolution still can be very relevant. That's it.
But we don't need it right now. We change for a second. no. Yeah, super. This one.
I'm going to be using sound on the computer.
Okay, it's gonna be used.
For you to know muting it. Anyway.
Okay, it's working. Good. We need sound from the computer.
There we go.
Yeah.
Perfect. So it takes us a little bit, but then our next guest is here, J. Jordan. But very importantly, a very important story also from temporary to permanent autonomous zones. So again, to reply and to repeat, we're listening to strategy and different tactics for the protection of those free spaces.
My computer's just gone really psychedelic. That's
Hello, technical assistance, please.
Look at that.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
What is that?
I don't know. Wow. Look what happened to my computer.
This I never saw. We have to be patient. We are very self-organized, so we find a way. Can you put that one away?
Okay, that's a lot better.
No, but he wants his own.
No, no, no. This is dog not there.
Yeah, someone there.
Yeah, yeah, no.
You can take a look. Just not connecting, yeah? Doesn't connect. Can you hold this there on?
And it's seeing it when it goes in. Yeah. That should work. Ah. Sorry? If there's the films and the notes, it's never not connected to Gen 2 fine.
Okay. You have it on put the key?
It's much more.
Yes.
Thank you for saving us. Great. Well, thank you, Marc, for reminding us of that beautiful history of creative creatures of chaos. I'm going to talk about a very kind of personal story of trying to find a permanent autonomous zone, trying to find somewhere that wasn't just a temporary event. I think there'll be lots of resonances for Berlin in the 90s in this story, but this isn't about Berlin in the 90s. I'd never been a Marxist waiting for the revolution. I was always inspired by, sadly, my dead friend, David Graeber. David always used to say, live as if you were already free. It wasn't about waiting. And of course, back in 1991, Hakim Bey, in his book Temporary Autonomous Zones, asked this question: are we who live in the present doomed never to experience autonomy, never to stand for one moment on a bit of land ruled only by freedom? Are we reduced either to nostalgia for the past or nostalgia for the future? And so I've been super privileged in my life to be able to live many moments and many events where it did feel like freedom was there. Oh, there should have been a video. Yeah, and there should be sound. Sound, nice techno sound. Come on. We'll have to do it. Can we have sound? Somehow off. Oh, I know. It's my fault. Sorry, entirely my fault. The sound's coming from the DVD. Sorry. Okay.
No, it's not.
No, it is. I think that is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
When the sound, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, that was my fault. Okay, start again. And I was very privileged to be able to live these moments.
Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon the levers, upon the levers, upon the levers, levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. You've got to make it stop. You've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all. Put your bodies upon the machine, the machine, bodies, the machine, and you've got to put the machine, put your bodies, 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 put your bodies upon the machine.
And I wanted to start with that, partly because the music was written by my son when he was 17, and it's his birthday today. So, but really also it's because it was the first place where, one of the first places where I really sensed that freedom, which was a squatted 45 houses in East London against the building of a motorway. Another place I experienced that freedom of space was being privileged to be part of Reclaim the Streets, London Reclaim Streets parties, where we tried to show what the street, which we thought was the commons, that was privatized by the car, we tried to show what it was and what it could feel like if we filled it with dancing bodies and rave music. And of course, if you bring pleasure into radical politics, it becomes quite addictive and quite popular. And so at some points we had about 8,000 people dancing illegally on motorways, reclaiming that space for bodies and not machines, including some really beautiful moments of audacious creativity and chaos making, such as these big carnival dresses, and they were on the motorway with 8,000 people dancing around them. They got near to the sound system so you couldn't hear them, what was happening underneath the dresses, and hidden from the eyes of the police, there were actually people with jackhammers digging holes in the tarmac and planting trees. So these were these amazing moments. And that kind of audacity really spread, and street parties were really one of the founding part of the anti-globalization movement in the 90s. Other spaces of freedom were the climate camps that I experienced. These were camps that were self-organized, camps that were squatting sites that were going to be destroyed by fossil fuel infrastructures, and they ended always, the camps showed self-organization and then ended with a direct action against climate criminals. But all these spaces, all these autonomous zones were trying, as Ailton Krenak, who's a journalist, a philosopher, he's a leader of indigenous movements in Brazil, he says, we need to develop our power to tell another narrative, another story. If we manage, we will delay the end of the world. And all these moments that I've just talked about, they were amazing stories, but there were more than stories too. They were directly challenging the world, they were directly transforming it. And there were successes, there were victories. The anti-roads movement lost a lot of battles, where that video at the beginning, that's now a motorway. Those houses are now a motorway. But 700 road schemes were cancelled because of that movement. So sometimes you lose the battle, but you win the wars. The climate camps no longer exist, but they inspired many other things, and we'll get back to that later. And coal-fired power stations were cancelled. The third runway of Heathrow was cancelled for a while because of the climate camps. So, and the climate camps brought in the idea that actually the root problem is not an environmental problem, it's a capitalist problem. And as an artist, I trained as an artist in theatre, in fine art, in performance art. Suddenly I realized with all this stuff that actually this was performance that had a sense that meant something and that changed things directly. And it's where I really learned what direct action was, that it was really putting your body in the way of the machine. And it was the best fucking theatre I'd ever seen. So Liese has asked us, are we reflecting? Are we reflecting? Well, there's so much fucking reflection in the cultural world. I mean, you know, we're moved by the migrant crisis. So do we want to do something? So do we do something like IYY? We go and put migrant life jackets in front of a palace so that we can reflect on the issue of migration. We're touched by the destruction of the biosphere. So do we do another performance theatre piece so we can reflect on the destruction of the biosphere? We know that 200 species are pushed to extinction every fucking day by our economy. Do we build more installations so we can reflect on extinction? I call this neuroculture. It's really basically a kind of culture where we're looking at the world while it burns and we're playing some nice music. So what good is reflection without action? So with that kind of idea, in 2004, my partner and I, Isabelle Frémaux, set up a collective called the Laboratory of Insurrection Imagination. And the idea of the Laboratory of Insurrection Imagination is quite simple. It's let's not reflect, let's act, and then reflect, and then act, and then reflect, and then act. And what we do is we bring artists and activists together to design and to deploy new forms of resistance and disobedience. I just want to try a little exercise with you. No, it's too late. Fuck, no, okay, I'm not going to try the exercise, I just gave it away. It's like telling jokes, I always tell the punchline before I tell the joke. So we put artists and activists together to create new forms of disobedience. Because we believe that disobedience is what changes the world. History is constructed through disobedience. The right for women, people identify as women, to wear trousers comes because people disobeyed. The right for people to use contraception comes because people disobeyed. The right to have a weekend comes because people disobeyed. All these things, history is made by disobedience. So we believe that we have to create new forms of disobedience. So we bring together artists and activists to do that. Why artists? Because we think they have great imagination, great ways of thinking outside of the box, great ways of making things poetic, but tend to have big egos, tend to put their career in front of their politics, and tend to have a bit of a lack of coherence between their everyday life and their political ideas. These are generalizations, of course. Activists, while activists tend to be a bit better to work collectively, tend to have less big egos, not always the case, but also tend to have way more courage, tend to have more coherence between their politics and their everyday life, but tend to have a lack of imagination. It's always, let's do a demonstration, let's do an assembly, let's do a blockade, let's do a riot, let's do a strike. The toolbox is pretty limited. So for us, the idea of bringing artists and activists together is to create new forms of disobedience by using the courage of the activist and the creativity of the artist. And for us at the lab, art is not to show the world to people, but to transform it together. So we've talked a lot about climate change today, and the IPCC climate breakdown. The IPCC, the UN climate scientists, they're not known for their revolutionary pamphlet writing, but in 2018 they said this. They said we have 12 years for rapid, far-reaching, unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. And for us at the lab, that includes art and culture. So how do we change art and culture in unprecedented ways for the capitalist scene? So that means for us co-designing these tools. So sometimes we co-design very practical tools, like doing a climate camp, we co-design. We're always entangled in the movements as a collective, so we always work within the movements. We don't have an extractivist relationship like many artists go and, oh, I'm going to make a film about this protest movement and then show it in galleries. We're actually part of organizing those movements and we work within them. We're very against that extractivist logic that is in a lot of culture. So we all do things like design these shields that during a climate camp that helped us get through police lines with the photos of people affected by climate breakdown on them. We do things like doing the COP15 in Copenhagen. We transformed hundreds of bikes into tools of civil disobedience to protect frontline communities who were trying to have an assembly from police attack. It was good because these were recycled bikes, so they worked very well as barricades. We do things like we invented a new methodology, the clandestine insurgent rebel clown army. It was a bit of a stupid idea, but you can talk to me about that later. But it went global. There were clown armies everywhere, and it was trying to replace confrontation with confusion. The state quite doesn't like to be confused. They like to control things generally. It can involve things like setting up the world's biggest civil disobedience online and on the streets game. This was the Climate Games in 2021, during the COP21 in 2015. It involved kind of prizes, lots of prizes, because it was a game. It involved this kind of mapping system, and there were lots of teams that did about 125 actions, despite the state of emergency. That ranged from one team getting into the summit, changing all the loo rolls in the toilet of the UN summit, with a loo roll with the report, the scientist report of climate breakdown printed on it, which kind of told the truth. There was a team that hacked 600 posters with these keys and changed the posters. There was one team that went up the Eiffel Tower. They had a broken leg. In the crutches, they had antennas, and they went up the Eiffel Tower as a tourist and then transmitted a pirate radio station with their crutches from the top of the antenna. They got a prize. Now, this was all very well, and we did this for years, but there was something missing. It was always very much events, you know, summits and da-da-da, and there was something missing. We are always inspired by the avant-garde of the European avant-garde, so situationism, Dada, surrealism. That wasn't in chronological order, anyone who knows art history. And they had this trinity, which was art, politics, everyday life. So we felt we had entangled the art and politics really well. It was okay, but there was this thing missing, everyday life, because we do these events, and then we come home. We lived in London at the time. We had a flat, we had jobs, and we realized we were just reproducing capitalism in our everyday life, just by living in the metropolis. And for us, we realized that the metropolis is also a place that is designed so that humans only relate to themselves, so that they don't relate to other more than human species, because they can only just relate to themselves. They only think humans are those who make worlds. The metropolis is in a sense, the temple of everything that is artificial. And we felt really we were just reproducing the machine every time we came back from these events. And as cultural workers, we also realized that we were engines of gentrification. However many squats we were helping organize against the gentrification, we actually realized that it was impossible as cultural workers to live in a European city without being part of a machine that in the end is going to evict people who are poorer than you and who have lived in your neighborhood a lot longer than you. I think it's impossible in Europe at the moment to do that. And so we left. We also realized that the city, the metropolis, cannot adapt to the climate breakdown. It's too big. And so we left, we deserted, we went around Europe for a journey which turned into a book and a film called Path Through Utopias, which is published in Germany if people read German and French and Korean, if people read Korean. And we looked at autonomous communities around Europe, self-managed communities ranging from self-managed farms to self-managed schools. And out of that experience came the courage to desert. We left our jobs, we left our flats, and we set up a collective and co-bought a farm in Western France. And we worked with a landless peasant. We put her on the land. We started a farm. We also started to build, it was a ruin, so we started to build it, and setting up a school of art, activism, and ecology. But there was a problem. There was still a problem. We realized that the logic of the metropolis was still deep in our bodies. We realized that actually, even though we'd left the metropolis, that logic was still in our body minds. And we continued to go around Europe. We haven't taken a plane for 18 years because we work as climate justice activists, so it wouldn't make sense. So we take the train every time, and that always confuses the organizers a bit. Oh, are you phobic of flying? No, it's just flying kills people. And so we kept taking the trains and being invited to summits, being invited to conferences, being invited to festivals and so on. And we realized that that logic of the metropolis makes it so that cultural workers don't feel attached to places. Cultural workers should float. They should float and not feel attached, because it's dangerous when people feel attached to places. Because when people feel attached to places, maybe they want to put their life in front of the machines to save those places. So it's much better to have a cultural world which isn't attached. And your cultural CV, if you can say, oh, I've had shows in Zagreb, in Budapest, in Buenos Aires, in Dubai, in Shanghai, you've got a great cultural CV. If you say, I've lived in the same village all my life, and I've got to know the human and the more than human communities of that village, and that's what all my work is about nourishing those relationships, your cultural CV and your cultural career is completely fucked. So we realized this, and we realized that logic was still in us, and we were invited to a big festival at Camp Nagel, the Hamburg Summer Festival, and we were taught a lesson. We were taught a very, very big lesson. Basically, we did a 10-day art, activism, and permaculture course, which we ran with precarious youth and workers from Hamburg. And at the end of that process, we had a performance, a show in the theatre. Now, we love the theatre, we love the lights and stuff, so we often start on the stage, but very quickly we turn the stage into an assembly space, so the audience comes onto the stage. And in Hamburg, the audience discussed a question. Was it ethical or not to sabotage the banks that fund fossil fuel industries with ants? These are the crazy raspberry ants. They exist, and they go into computers, and they sabotage them. The audience said yes. We went out onto the street with our edible balaclavas and our edible costumes, and we put the pheromones of the ants into the banks. But there was a problem. There was another problem. We love mushrooms, not just magic mushrooms, all kind of mushrooms. We love them because they're the connectors of the world. They recycle death into life. And so we wanted the stage, the curtain of the stage, to be a fleshy mushroom curtain, to feel like flesh. The audience, before going to put the ants' pheromones, would eat the mushrooms and then go out. So we made an 8 by 9 meter curtain. Took a lot of time. And mushrooms, you don't see anything, and then they ping. They pin. And they get little like this, and then 3 days later they go, boom. And they pinned, and we're like, yeah, it's going to work, fantastic. And then there was a heat wave. And the mushrooms said, we're not coming out. We're not coming out for your fucking theatre show. I mean, we're staying inside. It's way too hot. We've got our natural timetable. You've got your cultural timetable. It's fine. We're going to stay in here. And so we ended up with a very expensive, very moldy curtain. But then we got home, and the whole project was a bit of a disaster. And we got home to our farm, which was a ruin, and we were living in this tent. And we opened the door of the tent, and yes, the tent was covered in mushrooms. And this was a lesson. This was a lesson from the fungi to us to say, you need to territorialize yourself. You need to stop running around. You can be here, and here is where we grow. And so we ended up in a big crisis. We left that collective, still exists, we left it, and we ended up here on Notre-Dame-des-Landes, in this squatted farmhouse, exactly where they wanted to build an airport with 2 runways, etc., to destroy 4,000 acres, 1,650 hectares of wetlands. Very important wetlands, which has 9 springs, very important for the whole hydrology of the region. Very important farmland, has lots of anonymous cows on it. And the airport was basically set up, planned in 1965, but it was immediately resisted by peasant farmers because they said, this is nourishing land, this is food-growing land, it mustn't be taken. And it went out the boxes, back in, out, throughout the years, depending on the markets and so on, depending on the governments. And then in 2000, it came back out. Of course, it was a green airport, but we haven't got time to talk about why it was green. It did have green roofs. Came out in 2000, and immediately people started to organize against it again, mostly citizens groups. But in 2008, something changed. Basically, there was a climate camp inspired by people who've gone to climate camp in the UK. And the climate camp, they decided to do the first French climate camp on the site of the airport project. And during that climate camp, a letter was read by some inhabitants who had been living in some of the farms. And they were seeing the farms being emptied because people were selling the farms. They're forced, when a big project like that happens, you're forced to sell your property. And many farmers had refused to sell, but many had also sold. And these inhabitants wrote this letter and said they saw it, the whole area being deserted. And they said, to defend a territory, you need to inhabit it. And so that's where the ZAD started. The climate camp packed its bags, and it went off, but many people stayed. About 20, 30 people stayed, and that's where the ZAD came into being. The ZAD, and also the slogan, against the airport and its world, everything that represented, that the airport represented. And so the ZAD, and it originally was an administrative term, planning term, for zone à aménagement différé, which means a zone that will be developed later. And so we hacked it to be zone à défendre, to zone to defend. And that's where was the beginning of what became this famous autonomous zone on these 1,650 hectares of wetlands. And so people started to build huts, build tree houses. Some huts were a bit more punk, some huts were a bit more futuristic, some huts were on water. Many were entangled into the 22 kilometers of hedgerows that we have. And people started to make relationships with farmers and learn to farm. It wasn't always easy, but learn to farm and farm in the way of the runways and start to produce, make bakeries, cheese making, pirate radio stations, and so on in the way. Of course, this didn't go down too well with the French state, and so in 2012, Operation Caesar begins. I mean, can you believe it? They actually called it Operation Caesar in the land of Asterix. And it begins, and incredible diversity of resistance. All ages, absolutely incredible. So the police didn't know whether they're going to see burning barricades, or old-age local pensioners singing peace songs, or people chucking stuff, or kind of more non-violent direct action from the trees. Our greatest ally was mud. There were sometimes people naked, showing their vulnerability to the robocops, and as you must always have in a resistance, there were Vikings. And despite the resistance, 12 farmhouses were destroyed, but something incredible happened. Something really extraordinary happened on the Bocage in 2012. We had basically, people had put together this call out a year before. And they'd said, if there's an eviction, we will come back and we will rebuild. And that poster had been going around a year beforehand. And I remember seeing it. We were living on our farm, which was about an hour away from the ZAD. And we saw that poster and we were like, yeah, we know what it's like. There'll be evictions. Everyone's going to be depressed, arrested, injured, whatever. We'll build a hut and then the police will come. It will be very symbolic. Well, that's not quite what happened. Oops.
40,000 people came, and many of them were organized groups with pre-built cabins in tractors. Lots of cabins were built this weekend with an amazing energy. Lots of people say it was the most beautiful day of my life. We were sharing an intense moment, so unexpected. On this day, we really had the impression we would win against this awful project. Every morning at 6 o'clock, we were on the barricades, masked and ready to do I don't know what. Personally, for example, I didn't know how to resist, but I was there. For many, many people, it was like that. They didn't came the first day, they didn't came the second day, they didn't came the third day. On the Friday morning at 6 o'clock, the police came. They destroyed the cabins we had built. They also began to stop the work in La Châtaigne, which is a village we had built for this demonstration.
The cops tried to attack, not having understood that when you have 40,000 people who have built this together, they're gonna have even more motivation to defend it. The tension really, really rose. For 3 days, there were loads of offensive grenades being used, flashballs and thousands of cartridges of tear gas. More than 100 people got injured, and then the government realized that they were about to kill someone, and the government had been in place for not long enough for them to take the risk of killing someone, so they withdrew. Pretty much since 2013, the cops haven't set foot on the zone.
And so for 6 years, we lived without cops, without planning regulations, without any of the restrictions of the state. This is a nod to the Zapatistas. It says, you're entering a free territory, here the people decide. And so this real laboratory of commoning started to develop. More and more people started to come and move. And at the peak, there were about 400 people, 70 different squats. There were like cheese making, breweries, bread, pirate radio stations, theatre spaces, leather making, blacksmiths, you name it. There was projects. And for Liese and I, it really was an answer to this thing we'd always been searching for, this art of life. Michel Foucault talks about a technique of living. And he talks about, couldn't everyone's life become a work of art? Why should the lamp or the house be an art object, but not our life? And on the ZAD, it felt that this was happening. All these divisions of the modern seemed to be falling apart. So, the division between what is art and what is life, the division between building a new world and resisting one, the divisions between what is a home and what is a barricade, the divisions between what is work and what is pleasure, the divisions between what is life and what is activism. This is radical camembert made by squatting cows. And all of this couldn't have happened without what we call a culture of resistance. A culture of resistance is simple. Most people are not prepared to be on the barricades. It's just like that. 99% of people aren't physically, psychologically up for that. But no movement can exist without a culture of resistance. And it's a very patriarchal kind of logic to think, oh, it's always about the front line. The front line does not exist without that culture, without people helping. So on the ZAD, we had farmers, incredible farmers who, this was the hamlet that the 40,000 people rebuilt. This was half the hamlet, the other one was on the other side. And at one point, they put all their tractors around it to protect it. There were electricians who helped set up the electricity, to power the electricity for the squats. There were cooks who came and cooked for huge banquets. There were doctors and nurses. There were locals who had the doctors and nurses who helped people who were injured during the evictions. And the reason we moved there in 2016 was because it, for us, also did what we think is the basic DNA of insurrectionary practices. And for us, the basic DNA is made of two strands. It's made of the strand of the yes and the no. Create and resist. And you always have to have those two things together. Why? Because we can make all the community gardens we want, and we can make all the community wind farms we want. But if we don't stop the growth economy and the burning of fossil fuels, then all those projects, which are great alternatives, but they're not linked to resistance, they're going to be underwater or in a desert. And so for us, it's super important to remember this when we're creating our free spaces. You have to have these DNAs together. You can't just be in the alternative. And you can't just be in the resistance. If you're just in resistance, you burn out pretty quickly. You don't live the life you're dreaming. And so how do we put them together? A great historic lesson from history is that actually Silicon Valley comes directly out of the line of the utopian communities of the 70s who forgot to resist. They left the resistance, they just dropped out, created the alternatives, and we now have surveillance capitalism to show for it. Anyway, back to the ZAD, the French government kept saying, we're going to come, we're going to come back. You've had 6 years without the police, but we're going to come back, and we're going to build the airport, don't you worry. We continued to resist, thousands of tractors and bikes and bodies. 1 month later, we had 60,000 bodies partying on a motorway, just where they were going to build the first slip road to build the airport. And then 40,000 people turned up in a demonstration that was actually a ritual disguised as a demonstration. And the ritual was to put a stick in the ground and say, and make a pledge and a promise that you would come back and get your stick if the police came. And 25,000 sticks were put in the ground, and then there was a big party. You always got to have parties. And we also built a lighthouse, a working lighthouse, exactly where they wanted to put the control tower. But incredible thing happened. On the 17th of January 2018, Prime Minister comes on TV and says, the airport is cancelled. We cannot make it happen. It's too conflictual. Great victory. But in the same breath says, but all the illegal people, so all the people who'd been invited by the inhabitants to resist, who'd spent 10 years, some of them, on that land, resisting, they must leave or legalize. We produced a document with working with lawyers and stuff that said this is how we can create the commons. This is a legal document. This is what you should do. And then 3 months later, this was the government response. And so they destroyed 40 of our houses, a third of the ZAD was destroyed, and 11,000 tear gas grenades and explosive grenades were fired at us, 300 people were injured in 3 days. And then they called a ceasefire with a great little smile and a piece of paper, and the prefect came on and said, okay, ceasefire now, I've got a simple form, you can all legalize, you can all have private property, you can all have one name, one farm, one piece of land. And you have 10 days, no, I can't remember, 3 weeks to do it. And so everyone's completely shattered, you can imagine. And then we have to have a collective decision, are we going to legalize? Massive conflicts, huge conflicts. In the end, we make a gamble. We produce a paper this thick, put it in, and we hack the form, saying, you know, look, these are kind of collectives, and this is a name, but actually this field is going to be used by the potato collective and by the sheep collective, and it's not one name, one place. It's not private property. They get completely shocked. They then have to employ 5 people to deal with the hacked forms. Out of the 70 collectives, 63 decide to make the gamble. 7 don't, and the police come back and they destroy those 7 collectives. So it was very clear, you sign or you die. And this is where we are at now. We now have 10-year leases on the agricultural land, but the housing is all still squats, and we're still in negotiation with the government about the housing, trying to get the best deal. We tried to buy it, because in France, by buying, you can have collective ownership. They refused that. They're refusing that still, but we're pushing them. We're still in negotiation. And we're building the commons on the 1,650 hectares. And for me, this is an art of life. An art of life which enables life to flourish and live more. It's an art of life because we have become the territory. We know its winding paths. We've become its woodlands and wetlands. We know when the owls give birth and when the salamanders mate. The relationship and the attachments that we've built between ourselves and the non-human, or rather more than human forms of life on the zone could never, ever be taken away. And now the wetlands remain a wetlands. The farmland remains food-producing land, and the airport will only be a negative shape, a ghost. For us, this is the art of life, a gesture of reciprocity rather than extractivism. This means turning back the monoculture machine, decolonizing a place from capital, and opening it up as somewhere that enables life to flourish, to connect, to unfold. That is what is beautiful, to let life live more. Thank you very much.
Super, super thanks. We should be open for a few questions. So, are there some questions in the sake? So I think it's important that we have a few minutes for that. Does somebody have a question? Okay, pretty straightforward. Oh, good. Okay, thank you then, super thank you.
No questions, okay. Well, then I'll do a bit of marketing. So
Okay.
if you want to buy our book, no, we just brought out a book that talks about the ZAD in English. There's not much in English about it. And it's called We Are Nature Defending Itself, Entangling Art, Activism and Autonomous Zones. And we're doing a book launch at Hopscotch on Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. So do come along to that if you're interested. I mean, you'll see me doing the same talk. Sadly, Isabel isn't here for that. But anyway, I have got some books here if you want to buy them as well. Anyway, and thank you very much.
Super thanks. So we are kind of in a narrative from temporary to permanent autonomous zones. And I'm hearing a lot of strategies and tactics, where I'm myself very amazed of. Our following speaker is coming up in a little bit, because we're looking now at free parties, crackdown of the free party movement, squatting, and also resilience strategies. To strengthen our community from the core out, I would like to thank, in a few minutes, Steven Raspa from the Burning Man project on the stage. And after we're done, of course, with this little technical hiccup, that might take a minute. Okay, welcome, Steven Raspa.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, and I feel fortified actually by those comments of the art of life and life as art. I think many of us here can relate to that. And I want to share a little bit of a story about some of the evolution of my community, and in some ways how we have adapted in not just these last few years, but over many years to many different challenges. For those of you that might not know, Burning Man is not just an event, but we organize a temporary city with 80,000 citizens. Our temporary city has an airport, 2 post offices run by members of our community. We have our own legal zip code for the 1 week that we exist. We have newspapers and radio stations, restaurants and bars and all sorts of things, cafes, tea salons, hugging locations, all sorts of things. Except, unlike a normal city, once you get there, the main principle is really, well, not the main principle, one of our principles is gifting. So these things are not for sale. The only things that are sold are ice for health reasons and because it makes frosty, cool beverages in the desert, and that is a very nice thing. And coffee is also sold, and that helps to pay for the largest shade structure, and we donate any proceeds from that to the local Gerlach school. Our Burning Man, as the legal entity, pulls the permits and has insurance and does all the things that we need to do to interface with the formal and official world, if you will. But the members of our community bring all of the creative content and the things that they love, and they share it as a gift with others. So we are really a community created and citizen-created temporary city. And over the years, we've gone from what started as a local scene camping together in the desert to almost kind of an Olympics of human expression, a place where creative communities around the world come and meet in our temporary city, and we become citizens in a shared city for a week. It's deeply fulfilling. For me, it is a proof of concept in many ways, that we can live together socially in better ways than we find often in a world that doesn't always appreciate or live by our artistic and bohemian values. Something, of course, very ironic happened over the years as we recreated society according to our own values as creative beings and free thinkers. We also became responsible for running a temporary city of our own and interfacing with the federal government and all of these agencies and all these other things that really we never planned for. I think that there's a number of reasons why our city works so well. One is that we celebrate experimentation and we allow people to take personal risks. We try to minimize unforeseen risks like structural collapses and those sorts of things, but we let people take responsibility for their lives and their actions. We have 10 guiding principles that have emerged over many years, and they are kind of a social agreement, and we all love those principles, and they're a reflection of our values, and we can have conversations around those principles. We operate as a 24-hour city with some thoughtful placement of how neighborhoods and people that want to have similar experiences can get along. We have a balance of day and night experiences for choice of lifestyle, and we zone for loud sounds, so if people want to party all night, that's like on the ends of the city, and in the middle it's a little quieter. We take a highly decentralized and deregulated approach to organizing our city, just enough structure that we need to have, but not too much. And we end up with very engaged citizens solving their own problems and bringing what they love to their city in a very bottom-up way. These 10 guiding principles were written down for the first time around 2004. As I mentioned earlier, our social experiment began in 1986, so it was really some time after that these were written down. And they were written down at a time when our culture began to scale and more people from around the world started coming and saying, you know, how can I help? Can I be some kind of cultural ambassador? You know, and we said, well, these are things that have been important to the culture and creating a space for people to come together and bring what they love. And they were written to be in tension even with one another, to require critical thought. They're not rules, they're not commandments, they are guiding principles that reflect our underlying values. I encourage you to read the full texts at our website at burningman.org. They're written with a kind of poetry and a tension between them, again, to require critical thinking. And they've been very useful in our own adaptation strategies and thinking about how our culture can scale and go around the world and be localized and authentic without being like clones everywhere or some kind of licensing bullshit that we don't want to have to really do. We faced a lot of challenges over the years. Really, this social experiment could have ended many, many times, from, again, being kicked off the beach in 1990 to rapid growth that was very, very challenging for the early organizers from 90 to 96, to injuries and driving fatalities that led us to change driving policies and encourage people to get out of their cars. And first, we became a pedestrian city and then a bicycle city. We still allow mutant vehicles and art to go around, but it has to go at like 5 miles an hour. And our approach has really always been to try to have etiquette before rules. And we only try to set rules when it would threaten the survival of our event or culture. We were denied a permit in '97 by the federal government to use public land, so then we moved to private land, and the sheriff decided to confiscate all of our ticket revenue proceeds, so we were broke. Our primary founder, Larry, had to take his hat off and pass it, and just so that we could pay for the rental of the porta potties that we brought out. There's been, first of all, let me say that every year we pay millions of dollars to the U.S. Bureau of Land Management, to the federal government, to use public land, which I think is a bit of a crime, really. And at times, when there are changes in administration, they make new suggestions, like you should put cement barricades entirely around your city in the desert in case someone should try to drive in. I'm like, well, but we have cars inside that people have driven in, so you know, these don't make sense environmentally, they really don't make sense, so we have to have conversations like, this seems fair, this is outrageous, no. And over the years, we've had to become advocates for uses of public space and free space and creative spaces. In 2012, we tried to be very fair as more and more people wanted to get tickets to Black Rock City, so we tried to have a randomized ticket purchase process, but then that almost dissolved the social bonds that had built up, because many of our theme camps and people that work together on large projects that they gift to the city couldn't all get enough tickets to do what they wanted to do. Oh, our community was really angry with us. They're like, what were you thinking? So now we have a combination of directed tickets for large groups and art projects, but also a large block of tickets that are randomly available, because we always want new people to enter into it. We don't want to be a closed system. On an ongoing basis, we have people trying to use our intellectual property to throw for-profit events, or even reduce the entire culture sometimes to a dress-up theme party to sell drinks in a bar. And not express the full richness and challenge of the culture. So we have to fight to exercise our intellectual property, but our attitude towards intellectual property is that it's actually a community asset that Burning Man kind of has to maintain in the world on behalf of our community, to use it in ways that are culturally aligned. We're like a hybrid organization in just so many ways. It's sort of crazy. And then within our own culture, we've faced challenges. Our own popularity has led so many different kinds of people to want to come to it that sometimes we've had people come and try to set up private, very exclusive camps that aren't open to others and don't add anything to the city, which to me is essentially privatizing public space and capitalizing on our gift economy and the generosity of everyone in the city, which creates the whole reason why people want to be there. So we've had to make cultural course corrections, and we're a couple years into this process. Rather than do it in like a top-down way, we involved the theme camps and people that have been a part of our culture to say, how shall we address this? Yeah, and now 2 years of no income from COVID. We were never very good at fundraising or even asking for money. We have no sponsors and never wanted them. So we relied only on our ticket sales. We had $10 million built up in reserves. That's all gone now. You know, we cut back our office space in San Francisco. We took pay cuts. Some people went back to just being full volunteers. We had to make some layoffs. We couldn't hire our seasonal staff. So it's been a, you know, challenging and emotional time, but hard for everyone. So how did we adapt more recently to COVID? So first of all, I mentioned we had to cut our costs. We had to get good at fundraising, and our community made donations ranging from saying you can keep the ticket money that we paid even though we can't have the event, to a few dollars here, to someone that gave us $1 million. And we also hosted a global auction working with artists in our community. And we really encouraged decentralized free online platforms. So first we were thinking, okay, like everyone's going online, we should go online. And we thought, well, maybe now we need to create a platform. But really, our community had already created several of them. So we ended up in 2020 with 10 different sort of online virtual experiences or hybrid experiences and platforms that kind of created simulations of the city, and in a way, without realizing it that year, by supporting all of those things, we created sort of an accelerator for social technology and experimentation, and we saw some benefits. Greater accessibility, it was a free experience. People that couldn't afford to come, it was great. People that were mobility challenged. I had a wonderful conversation with a guy who was a paraplegic, and you know, he's like, this is my first burn, and these people are amazing, and we love it. Others in our community hated the online thing and still do and want nothing to do with it. We experimented with bringing the culture online in many different ways, including our own programming. And then for remaining staff, we said, okay, we need to shift our focus to bringing back Black Rock City better when we can, which for us means greener, more diverse, and smarter from a production perspective. We created community support for online events, support for our network. We have a volunteer regional events committee that I helped to found, and that team created sort of a COVID considerations document, and then we put it online to be crowdsourced and added to. So we were learning what was happening around the world and what was opening up where and what was working and what didn't seem to be working. And we shifted our orientation to greening our operations. We own a little piece of land at FREI Ranch, and we held a land, what is it called again? I'm forgetting what LAGI stands for, but basically Land Art Generation Initiative. So we held a competition for designs and social spaces that could also be carbon negative or regenerative. And we selected initially 10, but we're actually implementing 52 different design ideas with the goal that it will be better for the environment for Burning Man to exist than for it not to. And we also spent the time working on a 2030 environmental plan to get to carbon negative by 2030. Are we there yet? Do we know all the things that we need to do? No. But we decided to use this time because the climate crisis is very real, and we also crowdsourced really with our community how to address these challenges. We also shifted a lot of our focus to radical inclusion, diversity, and equity. We're still a white, more affluent than average event at this point, even though we started with a bunch of dirt poor artists. And so we've been really thinking and taking trainings ourselves about okay, what really is a microaggression, and how can our spaces really be more welcoming to people, and what does it mean to meet people where they are? And we did a lot of listening to our community. Lots of criticism, and we listen honestly to it all. This is a time where we're all trying to adapt, and there is wisdom to be found everywhere. How did our community adapt? So they independently developed those online platforms or worlds and created their own hybrid experiences. They shared the COVID adaptation strategies globally and what they were doing, including go, no-go decisions and why they were making them. They offered emotional support to one another, and some of them created community Zoom rooms to just hang out weekly together. They brought Burning Man to their front porches and their backyards and their neighborhoods. This has been the last 2 years where the culture has spilled over into everyday reality more. They, created art maps and placed art on their front lawns, and people would drive around and visit it. They created experiences and scattered them throughout their neighborhoods and started meeting their neighbors. Their neighbors were coming around and visiting. So that was a nice outcome, honestly. There were more micro-burns and just tiny events everywhere around the world, which I've been thinking might lead to greater resiliency and maybe gave more people a chance to be community organizers. And a bunch of burners in our community created a free, unpermitted event they called Plan B, or the Free Burn, in Black Rock Desert. They used just social media and a GPS map and placed themselves, and they gathered during the week that we would have normally gathered in the Black Rock Desert without getting the permits from the federal government. Others chose to put their energy into local community spaces and permanent land searches. And more this is something that's happening in our community, and I think has to happen in creative communities around the world, which is we need to pool our resources to own spaces and purchase land or buildings. We have to get out of our silos and lock in the spaces in cities. And I'm sort of have become very mistrustful about changes in administrations and things that can change policies on art spaces. This is just an image. I loved it. You know, as I said, some members of our community could not stand this online thing. They're like, I'm sick of this online thing. I'm not going online. I'm never going online. So in Seattle, a bunch of burners created, instead of a virtual reality, an actual reality track where they placed, like, they had all interactive theme camps and art and things that they would have normally brought to Burning Man. They put it up throughout the city, and they had a map, and they visited each other. This is an image of the planned burn or free burn. We estimate about 12,000 people went out there, self-organized, observed the principles, brought them with them. I was worried that there might be issues with people driving at high speeds, but actually the community took care of one another. And I'm super proud of them. You know, this is honestly, as an organizer, you could fear something like this, that you could be out of business, but like, I am so happy to know that if Burning Man went away as a centralizing organization, the culture would be very strong around the world. Online, one of the things I really loved, there was the last 2 years, there's been a virtual temple online. There's been so much loss, suffering, pain in the world. So this was one way that our community created a virtual space where you could enter it, you could make offerings, you could write the names of loved ones on these virtual spaces, and there was actually a closing ceremony where the digital experience burnt, and all of the data was downloaded into a hard drive and will actually be smashed and brought to our temple when we can regather. So this was an important centralizing ritual, and one way that I think technology did help us to cope and still feel together. Our annual tradition is building a sculpture of a humanoid figure and burning it, and we have done that for the last 2 years with a live telecast, simulcast with our community to continue our tradition going, even though we're in separate places. So I'd like to say we normally stand in a great circle when the man burns, and last 2 years our circle got much, much wider, but we're all still standing in it in some way. And we really tried to support one another. First of all, I have to say the community really saved Burning Man financially with their donations and their trust in us. Burning Man turned around, and we wanted to be able to still give artist grants, and the person that gave us $1 million gave us $1 million so we could continue. We gave out grants to 62 art projects internationally without any obligation of coming and bringing it to Burning Man, but we encouraged them to set them up somewhere in their cities or in their local regional events. Many of them still plan to bring them to Burning Man, and we hope that they will. Also, with the auction, we didn't feel good that all the money should go to Burning Man, so the artists had the option of keeping 55% of the selling price in the auction. It was a challenging time, I have to tell you. I was involved in the auction planning, and there were times when I didn't like that, there was this pressure to sell the art because so much of our art is about shared experience. But it was helpful for the artists and for us. The Burning Man art department team created artist discussion and resource sharing lists so the artists could support one another directly. We had online community working groups, which we still have, that were completely open to anyone that wanted to join them on how we can be more environmentally regenerative and get to being carbon negative. We have also working groups online about radical inclusion, diversity, and equity, and how we can bring our city back better. And Burning Man also shared with the community a guide on how to independently and responsibly gather in the desert. So we issued a little survival guide saying, here are things to think about, and please, leave no trace. So we did not organize the unofficial burn, but we knew people would be going out there, and we tried to equip them with the knowledge that they would need to be self-reliant and to do it responsibly and well. And Burning Man and volunteer teams supported online and impersonal regional events in lots of ways throughout this year. I'm particularly proud also that members of our community really stepped up in trying to be helpful during COVID. There were Burners and Burners Without Borders chapters that helped to make and distribute over 1 million units of personal protective equipment, masks and shields. And there were over 250 projects related to COVID, Black Lives Matter, and disaster relief that took place in this time. So in a way, you know, maybe a good thing is when a great river cannot flow or is blocked, that new channels open up and the energy goes someplace else. I think these are all examples of that phenomena. All the energy that would have gone into our one large global event or our largest regional events went into all these other forms in the world. So I don't know about you, but it has been one heck of a couple of years. And while sheltering in place, I certainly had a lot of time to think. And COVID gave in some ways a couple of, as I referred to it, backhanded gifts. One of them for me was really just the proof of what I always believed spiritually, that absolutely everything is connected and we are all connected to one another in the natural world. And that yes, when something is out of balance in one part of the world, it affects another. Big change can happen fast, bad, but also good. We had some proof that by not driving for a while, that the skies could clear, and they did. Our gatherings and spaces are forums for rapid prototyping and behavioral change. I believe that all of our creative spaces, our gatherings and convenings, should be places where we hack aspects of society and try to figure out better ways of being together and solving the problems that relate to the challenges of our time. And I am hopeful. I know that we have brilliant people in all of our communities around the world, and I know that those people are going to continue to work and try to tackle these issues and problems. I think that in the completely divisive and fragmented world that we're living in right now, that creating welcoming and inclusive spaces is important for social change. I think we have to create spaces for people that think that they're so different from one another and objectify one another, to meet one another and have shared experience and to find their commonality. And I think it's important to create a common ground to stand on again in the world so we can agree on what we need to do as people. Because it's as if truth itself has become a product that has become so fragmented and sold and pushed through the media that we've lost our ability to honestly see what is important in life and what we need to work on. And by working together, we will get there faster. By sharing information, what's working, tactics and approaches, these kinds of cases and convenings like the one that you just heard about what happened in Nantes. We will learn faster, we will be more resilient, we will adapt faster, and we will, get to better places faster. So, in the spirit of that, I kind of wanted to have a little exercise. You've been sitting a while, and I think that every time there are a bunch of passionate and interesting people together, that they should meet one another. So I'd like you to consider some questions, and then meet 1 to 2 people that you don't know, and then we'll have a little closing after that. Are you up for that? Maybe. I'm going to make you get out of your seats anyway. So, some questions. 1, what gift must you give as a person or you will regret in your life? If you are on your deathbed, what will you regret not doing in your life? Or just, what are you good at and willing to share? Where does your passion or joy as a person meet a real need in the world? What do you want to learn more about or need help with? What are you working on? So, The instructions are just meet 1 to 2 people and share answers to just one or more of those questions in the next 5 to 7 minutes. And if you feel a connection with someone, feel free to exchange contact information or continue the conversation afterwards. So, are we ready? Got your questions? You don't have to have all of them, just which one do you gravitate towards? Now look around and pick a target and go have a conversation. I'm going to ring a bell for incentive. Hello, do you have someone? All right, I see maybe some interesting conversations happened, I hope. Did that stretch you a little bit, maybe? I want to just say that that simple exercise, which might seem like a little bit cheesy maybe in some ways, is very effective. Like, do that in your own spaces and organizations, like often. Help, like, it's one way that people can find one another about what are they really interested in doing, and get beyond, in some ways, the bullshit of like what we think we must be doing to like what really are we about. And you know, also share what you're doing with others to help strengthen community. And another way is just to stay in touch through Space of Urgency and Space of Adaptation, because they're really, I know, hoping to be more actively involved in sharing information that's helpful and connecting people. And I kind of want to do one last little exercise with you. Kind of a little closing ceremony, and I haven't done this before. I'm not sure how it will go, so it will require just a little bit of participation. So I'm hoping that you'll play along with me. Let's ring the bell again. So I'm wondering if you would repeat after me if, you know, you agree with what I'm saying. I may not be perfect. Now wait, there's a couple people out here that do either miss that moment or maybe they think they're perfect. Come on, nobody's perfect. So let's try that one again. I may not be perfect. Excellent. But I am a powerhouse of wonder. And we are even more powerfully wonderful together. Powerfully wonderful together. I want to unfuck the world. So I will do good work. I will joyfully share. I will joyfully share with music and ideas. With dance and sweat. With art and imagination. With magic and kindness. With love and determination. And with fun. Now, right about now, people say to me, Stephen, but why fun? You know, like, fun seems so trivial. I know, see, I'm with a fun group, but some people are like, fun is too trivial, you know, the world is fucked up, and, you know, that's not a strong enough word. And to that, I say, because if we don't make the good work fun to do and play well with one another, then we're probably just replicating the stuff that got the world fucked in the first place. So, the last thing I would really like you to pledge to, just one more time with me, is I will unfuck the world and have fun doing it. I will unfuck the world and I will have fun doing it. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing with me in that little manifesto. I hope that it will serve you in some way. And yeah, danke schön and wunderbar.
Thank you very much. Super, super. Hey, and very important element before I go to a last slide of Space of Urgency. Are there any questions? Because we have seen different perspectives just come up, to temporary autonomous zones to long-term. So there must be questions of people. And I see one there. Please, pass.
Yes, hello. I read an article about that they sold the majority of shares to Google in 2019. Is it true? Okay, because I read, like, I looked it up a few times, and yeah, I really was like. Okay.
No, we did not sell it. No, we did not sell Burning Man to Google or to a famous rapper. No plans. We would rather run it into the ground and have it, you know, bloom in other places.
So I'll start not with a question, but it isn't exactly a farce that Google took over most of the Bay Area and is busy taking over the world.
Yeah.
And without resistance to these entities and without reclaiming our cities that allow these entities to suck the power that they get from managing entire cities, we're going to continue to be fucked. And so I really appreciated that these 2 or 3 sessions just now were juxtaposed with each other, because Burning Man kind of is an example of when you leave your city behind and try to create something of a Disney World outside of it, you're going to lose the place that you live. You're going to lose your home. So I think resistance culture is extremely important to organize not just something to create in some fantasy outside of where you live, but to fight back from the bastards who fuck over your city daily. And Burning Man was never doing that. Burning Man did not organize people in the city to fight for people being evicted from their homes. They didn't fight for people, the racist discrimination that was happening to people. There's a funny, kind of tragic documentary that was made about the last black man in San Francisco. Well, that's actually, it's actually occurring. It's forcing other people, the underprivileged people, the oppressed people out of the city. So I just would like to start a conversation here about whether we're going to reclaim the cities where we actually live. I think it was a great presentation from Jay and the Laboratory of Insurrection that these entities are causing immense destruction. We can't just go create a utopia somewhere else. We have to build on top of where our homes actually are.
I completely agree with you on what the priority should be. You have to hold your ground, and there are strategies for social change. I need to clarify and even disagree with you. Burning Man was never meant to be a utopia or an escape from reality. If anything, we seek to be a proof of concept and to actually bring that back into our cities. We have invited mayors, urban planners, many members of our community have joined building commissions, arts commissions, or run for government to try to actually affect these policies. I'm part of a learning expedition between the city of Oakland and Saint-Denis in a northern suburb of Paris, and to try to think about different economic models to preserve cultural spaces. So you might have the wrong idea about the way that we view ourselves, and our founder Larry Harvey was like, we are not a utopia in any sense of the world. We, if anything, are a forum to explore aspects of society, hack them, rip them apart, and bring the best parts back into the cities that we live in. And so I also speak in front of urban planners all the time about the importance of saving art spaces, hacker spaces, squats, because these are the cultural incubators that make our cities great. So honestly, we agree, but I need to correct your perception, at least of what the work we think we are doing. And I should also say as well that, yeah, the founders of Google have come out to Burning Man. And there are citizens, and other citizens are, flying, trying to fly to Mars. And I would rather have those citizens focus on the real challenges in our cities and here on Earth.
The Mars thing is an interesting example. I don't want to attack. I can't blame Burning Man for the fact that
we're also not a Disneyland.
That different cities get destroyed by neoliberal capitalism, but saying going to Mars, it's a nice analogy because in a sense, all of that creativity went to go do an impermanent situation in an unsustainable desert situation. So you couldn't really think of trying to create something that was going to last as a home for people. We need an inhabitable planet. So we can't just go, create something temporary. We need to fight for
completely
the entire planet.
Completely agree. Yeah, absolutely. And really, it's been an interesting journey for us because, you know, we were kind of told we couldn't do what we wanted to do in the city. And I've often wondered about that. Like, well, why didn't the original founders just stay in San Francisco and say, well, you know, no, we're actually going to do this here. But there was something very liberating, I guess, about going into the desert and being completely free from the confines of society to act and be as we wanted to and to make art for ourselves as community. And I just want to say that over time, I think that it's caught at least the fancy and the attention of cities and urban planners. And I take it as a great responsibility, and actually my next phase as a person, to be an activist in cities and related to urban planning. And Burning Man has said, Stephen, go do that. Absolutely, and you know, we are inviting people that we think can have an influence. And in terms of a social change strategy, right or wrong, you know, Larry Harvey, when he was alive, he would talk to me. He's like, we just need to get as many people to pump them through the experience to understand what it means to be a part of a creative community, because they cannot help but be changed by the experience. He had full faith in you know, in artistic values and culture. So as a maybe, I don't believe that it is a failed change strategy. It is part of what we all need to be doing in the world, and there needs to be fierce and powerful resistance and a full-on no, and there has to also be a, hey, look, this is really fun, and look, shiny thing. Let's, you know, if we're not getting together here, then let's try to move towards another operating model together that might work better. But what I'd like you to know is I am one of the most powerful fucking allies of why creative spaces need to be saved, honored, and not only preserved, but encouraged in our cities. Otherwise, we lose our cities. Honestly, as creative people, we can always go out to the countryside. People in the 70s moved out and created communes outside of the cities. But I don't like that solution all that much. My friends have left the San Francisco Bay Area and, you know, tried to create other settlements, and it can be lonely starting over again and again. So no, I agree with you, and I'm honestly sick and tired of having artists also instrumentalized as part of a real estate development product. We've turned our cities into real estate products, for Christ's sake. And our cities aren't even serving their social function any longer. It goes to the highest, you know, price person. So I tell urban planners and people working on the, you know, the 50 and 100-year plan for their cities that if they want their cities to be worth living in, if they want their culture to persist, then they have to make places for people who are making the culture to live and for it to be an affordable and encouraging existence. And we have to get ownership of the land into creative people's hands where it stays. On our end, I think we have to also prove to cities sometimes that we are open door, that we are welcoming to others in the city that want to be a part of our community. And I think that they struggle with risk. You know, like, to be compassionate for a moment, a lot of like city planners are like, well, yeah, but we have to protect the public. So there's this tension between like risk, minimizing risk and harm from an urban planner's perspective, and what we love about being able to take risks and experiment in our experimental spaces. So, you know, trying to think about how do you zone differently for creative spaces and art spaces and provide at least a two-step financial system to save them. One, either give them the property, provided they have good governance and an open door policy and are indeed like actively creating social spaces, etc. Two, like if you give them that building very often, like we like buildings that are often at the end of their lives. You know, it's the only thing we can get in many cases, but they have character. So then the next phase is you need it, once they approve you, they come in and with all these new permit requirements. There needs to be a second infusion of cash to be able to bring the building up to code, or there have to be new codes that allow people to just self-govern and take their personal risk. And you know, the same way that you can enter a skate park, and you have the right to enter that space and break your bones, and the city is okay with that, Why couldn't we zone for higher risk areas and let people take their own risks? I share that with you because I just made that argument recently with a city planner to say this risk, this insurance stuff is part of the problem. People have to be able to take personal risks. Yes, we want to keep people safe. We don't want people to die in fires and be harmed unnecessarily. But you can't turn everything into you can't control culture. Culture is messy and needs to be free. So I completely hear what you are saying, and I hope that you hear as well that Burning Man, we are not claiming to be perfect. We're part of maybe a social dynamic, but we are in relationship to other cities and more trying to influence urban planning decisions in favor of the arts. We have to be able to save our cities, and we should be respected.
Thank you.
That was a great question. You spoke to my heart. Anyone else? I want to just thank all of you for showing up, for being here, and we have to all learn from each other, and I do agree it is a crisis moment in many ways. So don't give up. And keep it fun. And keep it fun. Woo!
Thank you, thank you. That takes us to our last slide for Space of Urgency. Almost done there. I want to thank you a lot for the input. I was super mesmerized. If we now go back to the story of Space of Urgency and what I told you in the beginning, what are we trying to reach with these impacts? So these transnational alliances to grow or the amount or protect more of those autonomous zones from temporary to permanent. I believe we all kind of agree with that in the audience. So we believe it's very important to work together to grow the impact as community on the resilience of spaces of urgency. And that is now actually why I'm talking to the crowd. We can only do this all together and build advocacy and really create this public awareness by sharing this urgency around spaces and the communities, giving them a face, and actually by that amplify the voices together. So in that, we actually want to do an open call to the audience, and also downstairs if you're in the hall. We believe that all these people that are here at the whole conference, they have all different expertises. So we cannot do this alone with a group of 20 or 30 people, like I showed in the presentation before, giving the demonstrations, trying to grow more social media reach to amplify these voices. But we believe we need all together, and this conference and physical meetings more and more, to organize public actions, local media collaborations, and develop together profiles, so you can also look at the website to really put those strategies and resilience out. Also net to that research and data collection, what we talked about before, also making impacts on policy level. With data, it's a very important element, we can persuade a lot. A lot of times our self-organized spaces and communities, who are they? What are they doing? And in a sense, we don't want to tell that all, but I believe that data in a lot of sense and research can push forward new developments. Also next to that, blueprinting resilient strategies. The ideas behind this conference, for example, that we have all of those different kind of visions and share this in the community. We hate conference where nothing comes out and where people just get together and then it's lost. So we will do our best to document this all and share it with you again. For the rest, local discussion events, roundtables, etc. How can we protect our spaces like we're doing in Berlin and different cities? So all of those things there is actually more a call of action to the crowd. Do you want to become part of this? And I think we all can in all different ways with different expertises. Just go down in the hall in the cafe and go to the people off the platform, because I think we need filmmakers, architects, all kinds of people in the whole world to more amplify these voices of our spaces that are basically getting extinct. So that was it. Any question to me? That is also maybe possible. If that's not so, then I would close the panel in a little bit. But first, maybe questions. Somebody. You can hear my tired voice. Oh, good. Yes, I see one there.
All right, so I have a question, but I do have to admit that I wasn't here for the full presentation because I was in the workshops about diversity and inclusion because I think that's very important. But I see that they're being recorded, so I would love to catch up on it later. Maybe generally asking, how are you involving the youth in changing these transnational alliances? And because I see that a lot of people in this industry that I'm meeting here, a lot of them, most of them are 25 plus, 30 plus. These are all people who, for example, if you want to go into harm reduction, you don't learn that you could become a harm reduction specialist in high school. You don't learn about, maybe you learn about it in college if you're at an open-minded college, but these people are going into it after 25. So a lot of their work, unfortunately, is teaching the younger, is preventative, but like you should be getting this into the youth's minds, like maybe as early as middle school, let's say like teenage years, like 13 years old, throughout high school, because this is also when most youth are like also like taking substances. For example, I'm relating this to the previous conference, so like with harm reduction, but also like I go to school with a lot of people, and only recently sustainability is getting a little more fashionable and sexy, but a lot of people just don't care. I was sharing a car ride with someone, and he said, yeah, like sustainability is just like not for me. But it's like, how can you not be interested in sustainability if you have no planet to live on, you can't start your mac and cheese food truck? And it's like, I've tried to talk to people like this, and they're like, I don't care, it's not for me. You need to get it into people when they're younger. And yeah, and I also just want to make a side comment that I'm working to start a podcast to fix this gap, to fill this gap. I'm networking with people here and in the United States because I'm from San Francisco, but I'm also located in The Hague, to educate younger people about like harm reduction, psychedelics, substance use, because no one is doing that, especially no one like under 25, targeting someone in their same group. So I really want to get the message across, but also tell them that what careers that you can go into, since schools aren't teaching this. And I want to get like 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and college students aware of like, hey, you can become a harm reduction specialist, or you could become a psychedelic therapist. That's so cool, right? I wasn't exposed to the proper like careers that you could go into STEM. So I was just like, oh, science looks kind of boring. It was also in a French school, so that kind of made it worse. Yeah, I wish I knew about this earlier, but then I'm 21, so I know that I can still make a difference and change what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna round off and repeat my question. Are there, aside from this attempt for the podcast, what are you as speakers or individuals who might have an answer involving youth in the change of involving youth in growing transnational alliances? If anyone would like to answer that question.
I think that's a super important question. So basically, very important. It's actually mostly, I would say, a large part pointed at youth. So through all of the world, all of the work we have been doing the past years, I think the past 7 years, a large focus is especially on that youth culture. Youth is experimenting, is self-organized, and especially through gatherings, events of rave parties, free open airs, they're gathering. And I would say that music, what we always said also back then, is the mobilizer of youth. So that is a very powerful tool, also because youth are very susceptible to ideas and political grounding. So a space of urgency, organizing demonstrations, for example, where we have DVS1 playing, Nicolas Jaar or other well-known artists, they are contributing to that idea of also making it somehow in a kind of sense mainstream. So suddenly you have a very powerful vessel to push forward and to create more public awareness. So I would say in the sense of youth, this is the most important thing, is to offer free space so that they can build their identities together, experiment, and through that involve. If there's no free space, they can't have physical platforms. So it's actually all interconnected. And I think there's various ways that we try to push that with this. I hope that's an answer. Okay, very good. I think we're running out of time. Unfortunately, I want to thank you a lot. And we're now, after this, going to Rave-olution from east to west with a bunch of fantastic guests on the stage. So I'm going to make room, give my voice a rest, if you can hear. And I want to thank you super much for being here. Super interesting. And if you have any other questions to anybody, feel free to ask, please. Thank you.